Hi guys, in today's video I want to try to answer the question, could the Wim Hof method help you survive in space? And so this video is going to be kind of a weird intersection of the worlds of science, science fiction, and even alternative medicine. But first, what is the Wim Hof method? So according to the Wim Hof method website, the Wim Hof method can give you a lot of benefits, including increased energy, better sleep, reduced stress levels, heightened focus and determination, increased willpower, and a stronger immune system. And what's interesting is I've actually read Wim Hof's book, and it seems like there's, believe it or not, a fair amount of scientific credibility to some of these claims, and there have actually been controlled experiments exploring some of these ideas. The main aspects of the Wim Hof method, as far as I'm concerned, are these breathing exercises that Wim Hof teaches and cold therapy. But for the purpose of this video, we're going to focus in on this idea of breathing exercises and how these breathing exercises might impact your ability to survive in space. Now, I got the idea for making this video, interestingly enough, when I was actually reading a science fiction book by Arthur C. Clarke called Earthlight, which was written in 1955. And what's really interesting about this is that in this novel, there's an instance in which they actually bring up what is basically Wim Hof breathing. So I thought it'd be interesting to see the context in which this Wim Hof breathing shows up in this 1955 story. And what we can do then is maybe try to see if Wim Hof breathing would actually help us survive the vacuum of space by doing a small experiment ourselves. So the context of the story, in terms of where the Wim Hof method actually shows up and becomes a critical plot element, is that you have a spaceship which has been heavily damaged and it's pulling up alongside another spaceship. And what they need to do is they need to get the crew from the damaged spaceship to the other spaceship safely and quickly, but they only have enough spacesuits for a few of them. So the chief medical officer of the spaceship has a plan, and he explains it. He says, "Now listen carefully. The first thing I've got to prove to you is that you can live for 5 minutes without breathing. In fact, without wanting to breathe. It's a simple trick. Yogis and magicians have known it for centuries, but there's nothing occult about it. And it's based on common sense physiology. To give you confidence, I want to make this test." And so the medical officer then has them do a test where they see how long they can go without breathing. So they all take a deep breath and they hold it for as long as possible. So that's going to be part one of our experiment as well. And then after that, he has them all breathe deeply, do deep breathing exercises for about a minute. So they basically do deep breaths and exhales repeatedly until their blood oxygen gets really saturated. And then they exhale completely and then stop breathing for as long as they can. And what's interesting is that's almost exactly what the Wim Hof method is. So typically when you do Wim Hof breathing exercises, you're going to take 30 or 40 deep breaths and exhalations, and then you're going to exhale completely, and then you're going to stop breathing until you feel like breathing again, which can be, quite a bit longer than you might expect if you're used to only holding your breath for maybe 30 or 40 seconds. So we'll go ahead and do the experiment ourselves and see how it goes. We'll see how long we can hold our breath by just holding our breath. We'll do 3 rounds, and then we'll see if the Wim Hof method, or this idea of hyperventilating, will let us hold our breath longer. And then we'll talk about whether or not it was successful in saving the lives of the crew in this story. Oh, one other thing is I also have a pulse oximeter, so we'll be measuring my blood oxygen content and my heart rate during the experiment. So we'll see how that goes. So what I'm going to do is, for this first round, I'm just going to take a deep breath and I'm going to see how long I can hold it. So So I'll recover for a little bit, and then we'll do round 2, and we'll see if we get a slightly better time. After we do 3 rounds total, we'll go ahead and do the Wim Hof method, and we'll see if we get better numbers or not. At the end, we'll tabulate all of the scores, and we'll see how I did. This is not really a perfect experiment by any means. There's a lot of flaws to it. One is, I'm sure I have a certain outcome in mind, and so that's going to subconsciously affect how long I'm going to hold my breath during the different trials. And also, this is a sample size of 1, but it's still kind of an interesting foray into the topic. And I'm sure that this has been done in more detail than other people, but probably not in the context of surviving a transit from one spaceship to another. So that's the context in which we're talking. By the way, in the book, one of the things they talk about is they say, hey, on the spaceship, we're dealing with 100% oxygen environment. So if we hyperventilate, we're going to get a higher blood oxygen saturation than we would if we were just dealing with normal oxygen environment. That being said, what's interesting again is that this book was written in the 50s, and by the time the early 70s rolled around, space travel, or NASA, I should say, had actually moved away from using pure oxygen environments in their spacecraft, and they were actually using a mixture of oxygen and nitrogen closer to what we have here on Earth. Part of the reason that they switched from an entirely oxygen environment is that you can imagine if you have a spark in a pure oxygen environment, the potential for an out-of-control fire is a lot higher. And actually, tragically, that's what happened, I believe, on the Apollo 1 spacecraft. Okay, so I've recovered a little bit, so we're going to go ahead and see if we can hold our breath again. And so now my heart rate's at 70 or 80 beats per minute, and my blood oxygen saturation's at 98. I feel like I went a little bit farther that time, but I haven't been timing it. I'm gonna put the time up on the screen, so we'll see if we did better than we did with trial 1. But I'm going to give myself just a minute to recover, and then we'll do trial 3 of the non-Wim Hof breathing style. Okay, so we're going to transition now to doing the Wim Hof style of breathing and then breath hold. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and take 30 or 40 deep breaths, and then I'm going to exhale completely, because that's the style of breath holding here that we're going to do. It's not really breath holding, it's just going without breath. And then we're going to see how long I can go without breathing, and then we're going to do that for a total of 3 rounds. So deep breathing to kind of get hyperventilated, and then stop breathing. And I'm definitely going to speed this up because you probably don't want to sit here and just watch me breathe and hold my breath for minutes at a time. So you're going to see this as sort of like a fast forward montage. All right, we'll start into round 3 in a minute. So at the end of round 2, my blood oxygen is at 46%, according to the pulse oximeter. My heart rate seems to have done pretty similar things, though I did notice that my heart rate went up quite a bit during the deep breathing exercises. And what's interesting is that my blood oxygen has still not recovered even after a minute or so. Oh, there it goes. So it's climbing rapidly now. I really don't know how reliable these pulse oximeters are, especially for these real-time measurements. But I will say that I also notice another detail when I'm doing the Wim Hof breath hold. I'm pretty sure I'm holding my breath longer, though we'll tabulate the results here in a little bit. But one thing I do notice is that that other symptom I mentioned is that I get kind of like a ringing in my ears, or I don't know if that's the right way to describe it. It's more like sounds become very distant. And people have been known to lose consciousness during Wim Hof exercises. And so even though cold exposure and cold water exposure is a critical element of Wim Hof, actually it's recommended not to do Wim Hof breathing in water, cold or otherwise, because if you pass out, there's a potential that you could drown. And I actually think that, I don't want to give it a bad name or anything, but I do believe I've heard of Wim Hof practitioners actually drowning. And so I'll put up on the screen whether that's real or if I just, heard that, if that's just a rumor. Okay, so I've mostly recovered, and I'm going to go ahead and do the third round of Wim Hof. Now, with Wim Hof, you don't usually take a break in between rounds like this to talk, but I forgot about that while I was doing these. One of the things is that you tend to relax a lot. You kind of go into an altered state, and so you can kind of lose track of what you're doing when you're doing Wim Hof. All right, we got that ringing in our ears again. Again, I don't know how long we did that, but I did do 40 deep breaths, and that seemed to let me go a little deeper. Wow, 39, 38. That's wild. So what's interesting is to see the delay when we're doing the waiting for the blood oxygen to bounce back. So there is a little bit of delay. So, but it does, pretty quickly bounce right back up to 98, 99 or so. So there we are, 99, 100. And our heart rate's at a nice 72 beats per minute. So I'll go ahead and stop looking at the pulse oximeter. And now I'm right at the point where the kind of like ringing in my ears has stopped. Okay, so I've now tabulated the data from the different breath holds, and you can see a couple of things jump out. So I have for each breath hold a graph which shows the oxygen saturation and also my heart rate. And then you can see from the x-axis of the graph how long each breath hold was. So first, when we're looking at the 3 normal breath holds, what's interesting to me is that they were really similar in duration. So they're about a minute and 10 seconds each, a minute and 13, a minute and 11 seconds. Those were the 3 holds. And I was not timing this as I was actually holding my breath, so it's kind of interesting to see. I sort of reached, I think, kind of my limit each time. And what's also interesting is there is some variability in heart rate. It does kind of bounce up and down, but it's pretty much in the same range for the most part. But my oxygen saturation stays really high for the normal breath holds. When you start looking at the Wim Hof breath holds, and I do apologize because my pulse oximeter cut out its reading for at certain points, so I don't have completely smooth data here. But the first thing that you should notice about the Wim Hof holds is that they're significantly longer. So this one, the first one was almost a minute and 50 seconds. The second one was slightly over 2 minutes. It was 2 minutes and 5 seconds, or 3 seconds. And then the third hold was actually 2 minutes and 8 seconds. The other thing that's interesting about it, so beyond the fact, so it does look like the Wim Hof method let me hold my breath significantly longer, or at least go without breathing, because I had actually been in an exhaled state instead of holding the breath in. But the thing that I want to point out that really struck me is that the oxygen level does fall. And what's interesting is that it starts to fall right around the time where if I was doing a normal breath hold, I would have actually exhaled. But at this point, I still really don't have the urge to breathe. So by the time I would have really been suffering during the normal breath hold with a Wim Hof breathing, I'm still doing fine. It's really not until probably a minute and a half that it even starts to become difficult to go without breathing with the Wim Hof. So the other thing that I wanted to point out is that it's a little bit weird, but at the end of the second and third Wim Hof style breath holds, my blood oxygen saturation, according to the pulse oximeter, actually kept on falling, and for about 20 or 30 seconds after I had actually started breathing again. And with the second Wim Hof hold, my breath actually, or sorry, the blood oxygen saturation actually went down to a low of 45%. And after the third Wim Hof hold, it went down to 38%. So I don't know if that's healthy. Maybe that's really bad. I tend to think that something transient like this is probably not particularly harmful. Obviously, if you go for sustained periods of time with very low blood oxygen saturation, that could be a really a medically dangerous position to be in. But I think transient, it's probably fine. I can't really recommend the practice. Again, I don't have any medical training, so I don't want you to come away from this and say like, oh, hey, this doctor was saying this. I'm not that kind of doctor. So, try this at your own risk. But it's pretty interesting to see that you can definitely hold your breath longer thanks to the Wim Hof method than you can from just normal breath hold. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what happened in the book. So what they say is we're going to open the hatches in 2 stages. First, we'll drop pressure slowly to 1/10 of an atmosphere. So remember the context, if you missed this part, is they need to get a bunch of people safely from one spaceship airlock to the other spaceship's airlock, and they don't have enough spacesuits to go around. So most of the crew is going to have to go just through a couple of meters of deep space. So they're going to go ahead and open the hatches in 2 stages. First, we'll drop pressure slowly to 1/10 of an atmosphere, then we'll blow out completely in one bang and make a dash for it. Total decompression is painful but not dangerous. This is what, I don't know if this is scientifically verified, but this is science fiction as of the 1950s. Arthur C. Clarke is known for having really good meaty science in his books, so probably this is a reflection of the best science literature in the 1950s. And given that they were doing a lot of experimentation and things in this era, this is probably accurate, but I don't know for sure. So he says, forget all that nonsense you may have heard about the human body blowing up in a vacuum. We're a lot tougher than that, and the final drop we're going to make from 1/10 of an atmosphere to 0 is considerably less than men have already stood in lab tests. So this is an interesting bit. Hold your mouth wide open and let yourself break wind. You'll feel your skin stinging all over, but you'll probably be too busy to notice that. As a matter of fact, the surgeon continued cheerfully, you'll probably laugh when I tell you the biggest danger of the lot. It's nothing more than sunburn. Out there you'll be in the sun's raw ultraviolet, unshielded by atmosphere. It can give you a nasty blister in 30 seconds, so we'll make the crossing in the shadow of the Pegasus. That's their spaceship. If you happen to get outside that shadow, just shield your face with your arm. Those of you who've got gloves might as well wear them. So that's what they're doing. So we'll find out if they made it. All right, they say they lost one man on the last transfer. He panicked and they had to slam the lock shut without him rather than risk the lives of all the others. It seemed a pity that they could not have all made it, but for a moment everyone was too thankful to worry about that. So very cool. So according to Arthur C. Clarke, the famed science fiction writer, Wim Hof breathing, though he didn't call it this, it was just more like yogic breathing. And I know there are a lot of varieties of breathing exercises in yogic tradition, and there's different yogic traditions. But at least this style of yogic breathing that has been popularized by Wim Hof could, according to Arthur C. Clarke, help you survive in deep space. Again, this is fiction, not science, but according to my experiment, it looks like the Wim Hof method can definitely help you go without breathing for a little bit longer. I don't know if it's the psychology of it, but it probably is the physiological fact that you're kind of saturating your blood with plenty of oxygen. Now, my pulse oximeter doesn't go above, 100%. I wouldn't really know what it means physiologically to be more than 100% oxygen saturated. I don't know if you can do that, but it does seem nonetheless that for whatever reason, Wim Hof breathing helps you go without breath longer. So if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos where we're kind of diving into interesting science and technology questions, often looking at the most cutting edge research that's being released or some of the funniest or quirkiest science news, then please go ahead and like and subscribe, and I hope you'll check out my catalog of videos and join me again in the future soon. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.